What if the real problem isn't that you can't focus, but that you've been trying to force focus in entirely the wrong way? Most people treat concentration like a battle. They sit down, stare at their work, and try to wrestle their attention into submission through sheer willpower. When their mind wanders, they get frustrated and try even harder. It's exhausting, and worse, it doesn't work. The brain doesn't respond well to force. It responds to conditions. Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in something. Maybe you were reading a book and looked up to find hours had passed, or you were working on a problem and forgot to eat. That state wasn't achieved through willpower. Something else happened. The question is, what? And can we create those conditions deliberately? The answer is yes. But first we need to understand what makes focus so difficult in the first place. Here's what typically happens. You decide you need to focus on something important. Let's say it's a difficult textbook chapter or a complex problem you need to solve. You sit down with good intentions. For the first minute, maybe two, you're engaged. Then your attention starts to slip. You think about something you need to do later. You notice a sound in the next room. You remember a conversation from earlier. Each time, you pull yourself back, but it's harder. The mental effort of constantly redirecting your attention becomes more tiring than the actual work. Most people conclude they have a focus problem. They don't. They have a setup problem. The brain isn't designed to sustain attention on something it finds unmotivating or confusing. That's not a flaw. It's a feature. In nature, an animal that stayed focused on the wrong thing would starve or get eaten. The attention system evolved to scan constantly for what matters. If your brain keeps wandering away from your work, it's telling you something. The conditions aren't right yet. So what are the right conditions? Let's break this down into what actually works. The first principle is this. Focus follows curiosity, not discipline. You cannot sustain deep attention on something that seems meaningless or incomprehensible to you. Before you try to focus, you need to activate interest. This sounds backwards to people who think focus comes first, but watch what happens when you reverse the order. Instead of sitting down and trying to force yourself through material, spend the first few minutes finding something curious about it. Not something you should find interesting, but something that genuinely puzzles you. Look at the chapter title and ask, what question is this trying to answer? Flip through and find something that seems strange or surprising. The goal isn't to understand it yet, just to locate something your brain wants to figure out. This takes maybe 3 minutes, but it changes everything. Now, when you start reading or working, you're not forcing attention. Your brain is pulling towards something it wants to know. The difference feels completely different. The second principle, focus requires a clear target. Vague intentions scatter attention. I need to study physics is too broad. Your brain doesn't know what to grab onto. But I need to understand why this equation has that particular form. Or I want to figure out how these three concepts connect. Gives your attention system something specific to lock onto. Here's an experiment you can try. Take any difficult material, anything you've been avoiding. Before you start, write down one specific question you want to answer from it. Not what you're supposed to learn, but what you're genuinely curious about, even if it seems like a small question. Then read with that question in mind. What you'll notice is that your attention becomes selective. Information related to your question jumps out. Irrelevant details fade into background. This isn't magic. It's just how attention works. Give it a target, and it stops wandering. Leave it without one, and it searches constantly. The third principle might seem obvious, but most people violate it constantly. Remove friction before you start. Every small obstacle to working creates a decision point, and decisions drain attention. If you need to get up to find a pencil, that's friction. If you have to search for which page you stopped on last time, that's friction. If your workspace is cluttered with distractions, that's friction. Each one seems trivial, but they accumulate. Your brain learns that starting requires effort, and it resists. The solution is to prepare everything in advance. Lay out your materials. Open to the right page. Have paper and pencil ready. Clear your desk. Make it so that when you sit down, there's nothing between you and the work. This seems like a small thing, but it's the difference between a brain that resists starting and one that flows into it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. These three things, curiosity, clear targets, and removing friction, they're not really about focus at all. They're about something that comes before focus. Call it momentum. The brain is very good at continuing what it's already doing. The hard part isn't staying focused, it's getting into focus in the first place. Think about a heavy door on a good hinge. Starting to push it takes real effort, but once it's moving, keeping it moving takes almost nothing. Your attention works the same way. The activation energy is high, but once you're engaged, maintaining that engagement is natural. This is why the first 5 minutes matter so much. If you can get through those first 5 minutes with genuine engagement, not forced attention but actual interest, the next hour becomes easy. But if you start wrong, if you try to force it from the beginning, you never build momentum. You spend the whole time pushing. So here's the complete approach. Before you even try to focus, do the setup. Find something that genuinely interests you about the material. Form a specific question you want to answer. Prepare everything so there's no friction. Then, and only then, begin. But there's something deeper happening here. Something about how the brain actually processes difficult material. Most people think focus means staring harder at something until it makes sense. That's not how understanding works. Real focus is active, not passive. It's asking questions, making connections, testing ideas against what you already know. When you're truly focused on understanding something, your brain is doing constant work. It's asking, does this make sense? How does it connect to what I learned before? What would happen if this part were different? Could I explain this to someone else? This active questioning is what keeps attention locked in. It's interesting. Passive reading or listening, no matter how hard you concentrate, always feels like work because your brain knows it's not really processing anything. Here's a strange fact about the mind. It can't stay focused on something it doesn't understand unless it's actively trying to understand it. Read that again. You can't concentrate on confused material by trying harder to concentrate. You have to change what you're doing. You have to engage with the confusion itself. Ask what specifically confuses you. Try to state the problem in different words. Draw a diagram, even if it's rough. Work an example with simple numbers. The moment you do this, something shifts. Your attention stops trying to escape because now there's something to grab onto. You're not just absorbing information, you're wrestling with ideas. The brain finds that interesting. Let's get practical. Imagine you're facing something genuinely difficult. A dense textbook chapter, a complex proof, a technical manual. The traditional approach is to start at the beginning and try to push through. This works for easy material but fails for hard material because your attention gives out before you make progress. Try this instead. Open to the middle of the section. Look at a diagram or an equation or a key statement. Don't try to understand it yet. Just look at it and ask, what would I need to know to make sense of this? Write down your guesses. Then flip back and scan for those pieces. What you're doing is creating a structure before you try to fill it in. Your brain now has questions it wants answered, and those questions guide your attention through the material. When you find something relevant, it clicks into place because you already have a slot for it. The focus required is much less because the work is organized. Here's another technique that works remarkably well. Before reading a section, close the book and write down everything you think you already know about the topic, even if it's not much. Just rough notes, whatever comes to mind. This activates relevant knowledge and creates gaps you can feel. When you then read, you're not starting from zero. You're building on something, correcting misunderstandings, filling gaps. The brain finds this much more engaging than trying to absorb new information in a vacuum. Now, let's talk about what to do when focus breaks, because it will. No one maintains perfect focus for hours. The question is, what you do when you notice your mind has wandered. Most people do one of two things, both wrong. Either they get frustrated and try to force themselves back, or they give up and assume they're not capable of focusing today. Here's what actually works. Recognize the wander, don't judge it, and restart with a new question. When you notice you've been reading without comprehension, stop. Don't go back and reread mechanically. Instead, ask yourself what you were just trying to understand. If you can't answer, flip back to where you last remember engaging and find something specific to focus on. A particular sentence that seems important, a connection you want to explore, anything that gives you a new entry point. The restart is quick, maybe 30 seconds, but it reestablishes the conditions that allow focus. You're not forcing attention back, you're recreating the curiosity and target that make attention natural. Over time, you get better at this. Not because your focus muscle gets stronger, that's not how it works, but because you learn to recognize earlier when conditions are breaking down. You notice when you're reading without asking questions. You catch yourself before spending 20 minutes in a fog. The cycles of focus and refocus get tighter, and the overall quality of your engagement improves. There's something else worth understanding about deep focus. It's not constant. It pulses. Even when someone appears completely absorbed, their attention is actually cycling through different modes. Intense concentration for a few minutes, then a slight relaxation where the mind integrates what it just learned, then back to intensity. This is normal and healthy. The problem comes when you misinterpret the relaxation phase as losing focus. You panic and try to force intensity back immediately. This actually disrupts the natural rhythm. Better to recognize that after 10 or 15 minutes of hard concentration, your brain needs a moment to consolidate. Not a long break, not a distraction, just a slight easing. Look up, take a breath, think about what you just learned, then return. These natural rhythms, once you stop fighting them, make sustained focus possible. You're not trying to maintain peak intensity for an hour straight. You're riding waves. Intense focus followed by brief integration. Over and over. The overall effect is what we call deep work, but up close it's more like a heartbeat than a marathon. Let's pull this together with a concrete scenario. You have 3 hours to work on something difficult and important. A research problem, a complex text, detailed calculations, whatever. You want those 3 hours to actually count. Here's what works. Before starting, spend 5 minutes clarifying what you're trying to accomplish. Not a broad goal like make progress, but specific. What question will you try to answer? What understanding do you want to have that you don't have now? Write it down in one sentence. Then spend another 5 minutes setting up. Gather materials. Clear space. Open to the right page. Eliminate obvious distractions. Make it so that when you're ready, you can simply begin. Now, start, but not with the hardest part. Start with something related but slightly easier. Something that activates relevant thinking but doesn't immediately overwhelm. Maybe that's reviewing what you worked on last time. Maybe it's working a simple example before tackling the complex one. The goal is to build momentum before you need it. After 10 or 15 minutes, once you feel engaged, then move to the difficult core of the work. Now you have momentum, activated knowledge, and a clear question driving you forward. The focus you need is available because the conditions are right. Work for 30 to 40 minutes at high intensity. Then take a real break. Not checking other things. That's not a break for your attention system. Actually step away. Walk around. Look out a window. Let your mind go completely loose for 5 minutes. This isn't wasted time. It's when consolidation happens. Return and repeat. Each cycle builds on the last. By the 3rd hour, you're not trying to focus anymore. You're caught up in the problem. Your brain wants to continue. That's what real focus feels like. Not forced, but pulled. Here's what people miss. The quality of focus matters far more than the duration. 1 hour of genuine active engagement beats 4 hours of forced attention every time. Most people measure focus by how long they can keep themselves in the chair. But that's measuring endurance, not depth. Real depth comes from working with your brain's natural tendencies, not against them. The brain focuses easily on what seems important and comprehensible. When it doesn't focus, usually that means something about the task seems pointless or too confusing. The solution isn't to try harder. It's to make the work feel important by connecting it to genuine curiosity and make it comprehensible by breaking it into questions you can actually engage with. This might sound like it only applies to intellectual work, but the principles are universal. Whether you're learning something new, solving a problem, or creating something, the mechanics are the same. Find what's interesting, make it specific, remove friction, build momentum, work in rhythm, let the depth come naturally rather than forcing it. There's something almost paradoxical about focus. The harder you try to force it, the more it resists, but set up the right conditions and it happens almost effortlessly. Not because focus is easy, but because you're finally working with your brain's design instead of against it. The real skill isn't learning to concentrate harder. It's learning to create the conditions where concentration becomes natural. That's the difference between fighting your attention and directing it. One exhausts you. The other energizes you even as it challenges you. So maybe the question isn't how to force your brain into deep focus. Maybe it's how to stop forcing and start allowing. Set up the conditions. Ask real questions. Remove the friction. Start with momentum. Let the depth build naturally. That's not a trick or a technique. That's understanding how focused attention actually works and working with it rather than against it. If you found this useful, there's one thing worth doing. Try it. Take something you've been avoiding because it requires focus you don't think you have. Spend 5 minutes finding one genuinely interesting question in it. Set everything up, then start. Notice what happens when you stop trying to force focus and start creating the conditions for it instead. The difference might surprise you.
You could spend 12 hours in the library with a neon yellow highlighter, painting the entire book like it's a coloring book, and I guarantee you, congratulations, you just spent 12 hours doing absolutely nothing but coloring. What separates the genius from the parrot isn't how much they read, nor the magical technique they use to highlight words. The difference lies in what happens inside the black box, right there in the spongy tissue of your brain. Most of you study as if you were stacking bricks in a vacant lot. You pick up a fact, throw it there. Pick up a formula, throw it there. And you expect that magically a house will appear. It's not going to happen. Real learning is architecture, not accumulation. Deep processing is any type of thinking that leads you to form a schema of knowledge, an interconnected network. Think of your memory like a spider web. If you throw a piece of information at it and it doesn't stick to anything, if it stays isolated, floating in a vacuum, guess what your brain does? It throws it out. The brain is absurdly efficient at forgetting what isn't connected. It says, "This is useless. Bye." That's why you read a page, and by the time you get to the bottom, you've already forgotten the top. You did shallow processing. You focused on memorizing, on repeating, on knowing the name. That is isolated learning. The secret to learning faster than everyone else is to force integrated learning. You don't just want to understand the concept, you want to know where it lives, who its neighbors are, and how it compares to the concept down the street. When you try to explain something complex simply, the essence of my favorite technique, you are forcing your brain to do this deep processing. You are creating analogies, comparing and contrasting. So electricity flows like water in a pipe. Bingo! The moment you make that connection, you stopped memorizing and started understanding. You integrated the information into your web, and once it's stuck in the web, connected to other things you already know, the brain protects it like gold. People who do this naturally are the ones you call geniuses or talented, the ones who get high grades without studying as much. But the good news, thanks to neuroplasticity, is that you can train this. It's not genetics, it's habit. So, from now on, I want you to install a radar in your head, an intellectual lie detector. Ask yourself every 5 minutes, is my learning right now isolated or integrated? If you are just trying to memorize the definition, stop. You are digging a hole in water. Change your approach. Ask, how does this look like something I already know? Why is this different from that? Force the connection. Is it uncomfortable? Is it hard? Great! The discomfort is the sound of your neurons lifting weights. If it were easy, you wouldn't be learning. You'd just be strolling. But be careful. Even with deep processing, you can get lost if you don't have a control mechanism, a steering wheel to guide this mental Ferrari. And that is exactly where most people spin out on the curve. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to say might sound like an insult at first glance, but it is the key that unlocks the universe of knowledge. Most of you are doing it wrong. You look at a book, at a formula, at a complex concept, and you think that knowing the name of something is the same as knowing something. It's not. I can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when I'm done, I'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. I'll only know about the humans who named it. To learn for real, to learn fast, to learn in a way that sticks to your mind like gum on a shoe, requires something more. It requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop kidding yourself. And the best way to stop kidding yourself is to try to teach what you think you know to someone who knows nothing, or better yet, to a 5-year-old. If you can't explain it simply, you didn't understand it. Period. Now, imagine with me something that will change the way you face every book, every class, every new intellectual challenge. Imagine there is a secret, not magic, but a method, a sort of algorithm for the brain that allows you to devour information and transform it into deep understanding, not just cheap memorization. This method, my friends, starts with a fundamental shift in your head. The first step isn't opening the book, it's opening the mind. I'm talking about mindset. You see confusion as the enemy. You look at a difficult problem, feel that knot in your stomach, that feeling of, I'm too dumb for this, and you run. Wrong. Confusion is the signal. It is the pain of intellectual growth. If you aren't confused, you aren't learning. You're just reviewing what you already know. People with a fixed mindset look at a mistake and see failure. People who learn fast, who really understand the gears of the world, look at a mistake and see data. They see information. So it's not this way. Interesting. It is this curiosity in the face of error that accelerates learning by 20 times. Yes, 20 times. I'm not the one saying it, the data is. So, the first thing you need to do to master this technique, to learn faster than everyone else, is to embrace the initial stupidity. Accept that you are going to feel like an idiot at the beginning. And guess what? It's wonderful, because that is the moment the magic happens. It's when your brain starts making new connections, neuroplasticity kicks in, breaking and remaking paths. But you have to want this. You have to be willing to look foolish to become a genius. If you are afraid of making mistakes, you've already lost before you started. Learning to learn is absurdly important and absurdly complicated, but it starts with this simple permission, the permission to be wrong. Now, it's no use having the right mindset if you can't even get your butt in the chair. And here we enter the second dimension, something many of you ignore because you think it's stuff for clean freaks, but it's pure physics, self-management. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think you're going to understand quantum mechanics in 30-second bursts, I have bad news. You won't. Deep learning requires a protected environment. It requires you to manage your focus as if it were the scarcest resource on the planet, because it is. You need to identify the chain of events that leads to your distraction. You pick up your phone to check the time, see a notification, click it, and poof, an hour is gone. You need to cut this at the root. Isolate the behavior. Remove the temptation. Create a space where deep study can actually happen. Without this, the technique I'm going to teach you is nothing more than a nice theoretical idea. You need uninterrupted time and attention to truly process the information. And process is the key word here. It's not about reading. Reading is easy. Anyone can read. It's about what your brain does with what you read. And that is where the majority fails miserably. Forget everything you think you know about studying. Seriously, throw it out. Most of you treat the brain like it's a supermarket shopping basket. You walk down the information aisles, grab a fact here, a formula there, throw it all in the basket, and think that when you get to the checkout counter, you've magically become intelligent. Let me tell you a secret. When you get to the checkout counter, the basket has a hole in it. You lost everything on the way. This is what we call shallow processing. You read the words, your eyes moved from left to right, but your brain was in standby mode. Real learning, the kind that sticks, the kind that allows you to solve problems you've never seen before, happens in a different dimension. We call this deep processing, but the fancy name gets in the way. Let's call it what it really is. The art of not letting information die of loneliness. Understand one thing about your gray matter. It hates orphaned information. If you learn an isolated fact, let's say the definition of mitochondria, and you don't connect it to anything, your brain looks at it and says, this connects to nothing I already know, therefore it's trash. And poof, it disappears in less than a minute. Deep processing is the deliberate act of stitching new information into the fabric of what you already know. It's not about memorizing, it's about integrating. Imagine that your knowledge is a giant spider web. The amateur student tries to glue a speck of dust in the air with no thread attached. The genius pulls a thread from the existing web and ties it to the new information. He asks, how is this similar to what I saw yesterday? How is this different from what I expected? If this is true, what else must be true? Do you want to know if you are really learning or just wasting time? Turn on your radar for isolated versus integrated. If you are reading and thinking, okay, got the definition, next, you are in isolated mode. You are digging your own intellectual grave. Integrated mode is loud. It's chaotic. You stop and think, wait, this works exactly like the water pressure in the pipes at my house. In that moment, when you create an analogy, when you translate the complex into the simple, you created a physical hook in your brain. You transformed a loose piece of data into a robust knowledge schema. That's why I always say, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you didn't understand it, because explaining requires you to connect the new idea to concepts she already has. But I'm going to be honest with you. This hurts. Deep processing is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. Your brain is going to want to go back to the comfort of just highlighting the text and passively rereading. Resisting that comfort is what separates the curious from the mediocre. You are building mental muscles, and there is no hypertrophy without sweat. Now, you can have the right mindset, the perfect environment, and be willing to process deeply. But how do you guarantee you aren't kidding yourself along the way? How do you know if your brilliant analogy isn't actually complete nonsense? You need a real-time quality control system. You need to be the manager of your own mental factory. And this is where most people smash their faces against the wall, because the fourth dimension is missing. You are there, sweating bullets, trying to connect the dots, creating analogies, forcing your brain out of its comfort zone. Great, but who is in command? Who is checking if you aren't just running in circles with great intensity? Most of you study like a broken robot that hits a wall, backs up, and hits the same wall again, only harder, hoping the wall will move. That's not persistence, it's insanity. To learn faster than anyone else, you need to develop a dual personality. You need to be the student who is learning and at the same time the cruel scientist observing that student with a clipboard in hand. We enter the fourth dimension, self-regulation. It is the ability to monitor your own thinking in real time and, most importantly, have the courage to change course when the ship is sinking. Most people have a primitive adjustment strategy. Oh, I did poorly on the test? I'll study more hours. Wrong. More hours doing the wrong thing just creates a more consolidated mistake. Self-regulation requires a constant three-step cycle: cue, monitoring, and adjusting. You are reading a complex text. Suddenly, your eyes pass over 3 paragraphs and you absorbed nothing. That is the cue. The mediocre student ignores the cue and keeps reading, praying for a miracle. The elite student monitors. Whoops, my brain turned off. Passive mode took over. And then he makes the adjustment. He doesn't keep reading. He stops. He changes the technique. Reading isn't working. I'm going to draw a diagram. I'm going to try to explain it out loud to the wall. I'm going to ask the book a question. He changes tactics until deep processing starts happening again. But here is the deadly trap where most of you will fall. And I need you to pay double attention now. There is a treacherous phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When you start self-regulating, when you realize your passive reading is garbage and decide to switch to an active technique, like trying to explain the concept without looking, my favorite, do you know what will happen? It's going to seem harder. It's going to seem like you're learning less because you're struggling more. And your brain, lazy as it is, will scream, "Hey, this is too hard. It must be wrong. Let's go back to highlighting text. That felt nicer." If you listen to that voice, you've lost. The difficulty isn't a sign that you are failing. It is physical proof that you are learning. If you change your technique and feel like your brain is frying, congratulations, you just found the way. Don't retreat to comfort. Self-regulation is the discipline of feeling the discomfort of inefficiency, adjusting to a harder technique, and enduring the pain of growth. You need to be ruthless with your own method. Don't fall in love with the way you study. Fall in love with understanding. If a tool doesn't work, throw it out and grab another. Test, fail, adjust, repeat. If you do this, you stop being a passive passenger in your education and become the pilot. But even if you have the mindset, the focus, the deep processing, and the self-regulation, there is a final villain, a silent thief that steals everything you've achieved while you sleep. You can understand everything today, Be an absolute genius at 10 p.m. and wake up tomorrow a complete ignoramus. And it's not your fault, it's biology. But there is a way to hack this too. The villain I mentioned? His name is decay. It is the law of entropy applied to your memory. You built that beautiful house of cards of knowledge last night, and this morning, the wind blew and half of it fell. This is biological. It is inevitable. As soon as you learn something, that information begins to fade. Your brain is a machine of efficiency. It doesn't want to waste energy maintaining neural connections for information you don't use. So it cleans house. And if you do nothing, you are going to spend your whole life filling a leaky bucket, learning and forgetting, in an eternal cycle of mediocrity. How do we stop this bleeding? We enter the fifth and final dimension, the one that guarantees knowledge stays, retrieval. And please, for the love of physics, do not confuse this with reviewing. Reviewing, for most of you, is scanning your colorful notes and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this." Lie. You don't remember. You just recognize. Recognizing is passive and easy. Retrieving is active and painful. Retrieving is closing the book, looking at the ceiling, ignoring your notes, and forcing your brain to reconstruct the concept from scratch. It is dragging the information out of long-term memory. It is the difference between looking at the answer to a math equation and thinking you understood it, versus having a blank sheet in front of you and having to solve the equation yourself. The secret here is timing. If you try to retrieve 5 seconds after reading, it's too easy. It doesn't count. You need to let the forgetting start to act. You need to let the rust set in a little. This is what we call spaced retrieval. You learn today, try to remember tomorrow. It's going to be hard. You will stutter. But when you manage to pull that information back from the depths, you send a powerful chemical signal to your brain. Hey, stop! Don't throw this away. I need this. You reset the forgetting curve, and every time you do this, the memory decays more slowly. You are literally refilling the memory before it empties. But there is a final trap for those who think they are clever. Don't be a flashcard robot. Many of you fall into the error of practicing retrieval in an isolated way. You memorize definitions like parrots. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Great. You memorize the phrase. But if I give you a complex biology problem where cellular energy is the key, you freeze. Why? Because you practiced isolated retrieval, not integrated retrieval. The golden rule is, practice how you play. If in the real world or on your exam you need to solve problems, it's useless to practice reciting definitions. You need to retrieve knowledge by applying it. Mix up the subjects. Use interleaving. Attack the problem from different angles. Force your brain to not just remember what it is, but where and how to use it. Now you have the complete map. You have the 5 keys. But having the treasure map doesn't make you rich if you don't start digging. And most of you, unfortunately, love collecting maps and hate picking up the shovel. Mindset to accept the mistake, self-management to create the space, deep processing to weave the web, self-regulation to pilot the process, and retrieval to beat time. But let me tell you one last inconvenient truth, perhaps the most important of all. Knowing how the engine works doesn't make the car go. You can watch this video 100 times. You can tattoo deep processing on your forehead. But if you don't close this tab right now and go there, in the silence, to fight against the confusion and the urge to give up, nothing will change. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Do not confuse the familiarity of watching a video with real understanding. Nature cannot be fooled. Your brain cannot be cheated. Either you build the connections or you have nothing. If you made it this far, if you endured the complexity and are willing to embrace the discomfort, you are already part of an absolute minority. Prove it now. I want you to make a brutal diagnosis of yourself right here and now. Which of these 5 dimensions is your anchor? What is your speed limiter? Is it the fragile mindset? Is it the lack of focus? Is it shallow studying? Comment below with the exact phrase, "My limiter is," and complete it with the dimension you are going to destroy starting today. Make it public. Commit to it. Most people will close this video and go back to the comfort of the shallow, of the illusion of competence. They will continue studying a lot and learning little, frustrated, blaming a lack of talent, but not you. Now you know that talent is a lie. What exists is the method. You have the choice to step out of the cave. Learning to learn is the superpower that makes all other superpowers possible. If you master this, there is no book too hard. There is no concept too complex. The whole world opens up for you to play. And if this spark lit something inside you, if you felt that tingle of curiosity you haven't felt in a long time, smash the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you value depth in a world addicted to superficiality. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the universe of knowledge without training wheel. Class is dismissed. Now the real work begins. Go find things out. Most people think remembering is about repetition. Read something enough times and it sticks. Write it down over and over. Flashcards, drills, cramming the night before an exam. And sometimes it works just long enough to pass the test. Then it's gone. But here's the peculiar thing about memory. The harder you try to force something into your head through repetition alone, the more fragile that memory becomes. It's like building a house on sand. It looks solid for a moment, then the first wave washes it away. The mind doesn't work like a filing cabinet where you stuff information into drawers. It's more like a living organism that grows and changes based on how you interact with it. And once you understand this, once you see how memory actually forms, you can make your brain remember almost anything, not through brute force, but through a completely different approach. Let's talk about what really happens when you try to remember something. You sit down with a textbook. You read a chapter about, say, thermodynamics, or biology, or history. Doesn't matter what. You read carefully. You even underline the important parts. You feel like you understand it. At the end, you close the book and think, got it. 3 days later, someone asks you to explain what you read. And suddenly, it's all fuzzy. You remember there was something about entropy, or cells, or some historical event, but the details are gone. You can't explain it clearly. You might remember the words, but not what they actually mean. This happens because of a fundamental mistake people make. They confuse recognition with memory. They confuse familiarity with understanding. When you read something, your brain recognizes the words, follows the sentences, and creates a feeling of comprehension. But recognition is passive. You're letting the author do the thinking for you. The logic is right there on the page, pre-digested. Your brain nods along. Yes, this makes sense. But it's not building anything. It's just watching. Memory real, lasting memory requires something else entirely. It requires reconstruction. Think about the difference between watching someone build a table and building one yourself. When you watch, you see the finished product. You understand that wood gets cut and joined together. But if someone hands you the lumber and tools the next day, could you build that table? Probably not. You'd realize you didn't actually learn how the joints fit, which cuts to make first, how to ensure it's level. Learning works exactly the same way. You can watch ideas get assembled on a page, but unless you've assembled them yourself in your own mind, with your own hands, so to speak, you don't really have them. This is where most education gets it backwards. People read and reread, they attend lectures and take notes, they highlight passages, all passive activities. Then they wonder why nothing sticks. The solution sounds almost too simple. Close the book and try to explain it to yourself. Not in your head where you can cheat and skip over the fuzzy parts, but out loud or on paper where every gap in your understanding becomes immediately obvious. Let's say you just read about how natural selection works. Close the book. Now explain it. Start from the beginning. What is it? Why does it happen? What are the actual mechanisms? How does variation arise? What does fitness really mean? Walk through an example. When you try this, something remarkable happens. Within seconds, you hit a wall. You thought you understood, but now you can't quite articulate it. You stumble over certain concepts. You realize you don't know what you thought you knew. This moment, this frustrating, uncomfortable moment, is where memory actually begins, because now your brain has to work. It has to reach into what you read and pull out the pieces. It has to arrange them. And when you can't remember something, when there's a gap, you have to go back and find it. You look it up again. But this time, you're not just reading passively. You're hunting for a specific piece of information you need. You're filling a hole you discovered yourself. This active struggle creates strong memory. Your brain builds connections. It doesn't just store words, it stores the process of figuring something out. And that process is what makes memory durable. Here's another crucial piece. You have to simplify everything until you could explain it to a child. Not because children are stupid, they're not, but because children haven't learned to accept vague explanations. If you tell an adult something complicated using fancy terminology, they might nod along even if they don't fully understand. They don't want to look foolish, but a child will stop you and ask, "But what does that actually mean?" That question is gold. It forces clarity. So when you're trying to explain something to yourself, imagine you're explaining it to someone with no background in the subject. You can't hide behind jargon. You can't wave your hands and say it's complicated. You have to find simple words. You have to use analogies. You have to make it clear. This forces you to understand at a deeper level, because you can't simplify something you don't truly understand. You can memorize complex terminology, sure. You can repeat sophisticated sounding phrases, but stripping away the complicated language and explaining the core idea in plain terms, that requires real comprehension. Take something like entropy. Many students memorize that it's a measure of disorder and leave it at that. But what does that actually mean? What is disorder? Why does it increase? Can you explain it without using the word entropy? Try it. You might say, in any closed system, things tend to spread out and become more mixed up over time. Like if you drop a drop of ink in water, it doesn't stay in one spot. It spreads out until the whole glass is slightly colored. That spreading out happens because there are more ways for the ink molecules to be scattered throughout the water than there are for them to stay clustered together. And natural processes favor the arrangements that have more possible ways to happen. That's understanding. That's the kind of explanation that sticks in your memory because you built it yourself using ideas you can actually picture. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The brain has a peculiar feature. It forgets the scaffolding but keeps the building. When you first learn something, you need lots of support, detailed explanations, examples, intermediate steps. But once you truly understand it, all that scaffolding falls away, and what remains is the core structure, clean and simple. This is why understanding creates such powerful memory. You're not trying to remember 1,000 individual facts. You're remembering a few key principles. And from those principles, you can reconstruct everything else. Imagine learning mathematics. You could memorize every formula as a separate fact. Quadratic formula, area of circle, volume of sphere, Pythagorean theorem, each one stored independently. That's a lot to remember, and if you forget one, it's gone. Or you could understand where these formulas come from. You could see how the quadratic formula is just completing the square. How the area of a circle relates to unwinding it into triangular slices. How the Pythagorean theorem follows from comparing areas. Now, you're not remembering dozens of separate formulas. You're remembering a few fundamental ideas, and you can derive the formulas whenever you need them. This is the difference between brittle memory and flexible memory. Brittle memory shatters when you forget one piece. Flexible memory bends and reconstructs. But there's another element that makes memory permanent: spacing. The brain strengthens connections based on timing. If you learn something once and never think about it again, the connections weaken, the memory fades. This isn't a flaw, it's efficient. Why waste energy maintaining information you never use? But if you come back to an idea, especially just as you're about to forget it, something powerful happens. The brain says, "Oh, this must be important," and strengthens those connections more than before. This is why cramming fails so spectacularly. You might stuff everything into your head in one marathon session, pass the test, then watch it all evaporate within days. The brain sees it as one continuous episode, not important enough to maintain long-term. The solution is to spread out your practice. Learn something today. Come back to it tomorrow. Explain it to yourself again. Then wait 3 days. Explain it again. Then a week. Then a month. Each time you successfully reconstruct the information, the memory becomes stronger and more durable. And here's the key. Each review should be active. Don't just reread. Close the book and reconstruct. Test yourself. Explain out loud. This feels harder than passive review. It is harder, but that difficulty is precisely what makes it effective. Easy review doesn't challenge the brain. Active reconstruction forces the brain to work, and that work builds lasting memory. There's also a strange phenomenon that happens when you really understand something. You start to see it everywhere. Once you grasp how leverage works in physics, you notice it in seesaws, in can openers, in the way doors swing. Once you understand natural selection, you see it in medicine, in software design, in cultural evolution. The idea becomes a lens through which you view the world. This isn't just interesting, it's another mechanism of memory. Each time you recognize a concept in a new context, you're strengthening those neural pathways. You're creating more connections, more retrieval routes. The idea becomes integrated into how you think rather than isolated in some mental filing cabinet labeled "Things I Learned for School." Let's bring this down to earth with a practical scenario. Suppose you need to learn about the nervous system. You have a textbook chapter to get through. Here's what most people do. They read the chapter, maybe twice. They highlight key terms. They make flashcards with neuron, synapse, action potential. They drill these terms before the exam. Here's what works better. Read a small section, maybe just about how neurons fire. Then close the book. On a blank piece of paper, draw a neuron from memory. Label the parts. Explain in writing what happens when it fires. Why does the signal go one direction? What role does the myelin sheath play? You'll get stuck. You'll realize you're fuzzy on several points. Good. Open the book and find exactly what you need. Read that specific part carefully. Close the book again. Try the explanation once more. Now you've actively wrestled with the material. You've identified your weak spots. You've filled them in. The information isn't just sitting in your memory, it's woven into your understanding. Next day, before reading the next section, reconstruct yesterday's material. Draw the neuron again. Explain the firing process again. This time, it should be easier, but you'll still find gaps. Fill them in, then move forward. Do you see what's happening? You're not plowing through the textbook in one sitting. You're building knowledge piece by piece, making sure each piece is solid before adding the next. It's slower initially, much slower, but at the end, you actually remember everything. You don't need to cram, you already know it. And here's the remarkable part. Weeks or months later, if someone asks you about the nervous system, you can still explain it. Not because you memorized it, but because you understood it. You built it in your mind so thoroughly that it's part of how you think now. This approach applies to anything. History? Don't just read about a war or revolution. Close the book and explain the causes, the key events, the consequences. What would have happened differently if one factor had changed? Languages? Don't just memorize vocabulary. Use words and sentences. Explain grammar rules in your own words. Make up stories. The pattern is always the same. Active reconstruction, simplification, spacing, application. Now, there's something worth understanding about why this works. Something fundamental about how the brain operates. The brain is not designed to store information the way a computer does, with each file neatly separated. Instead, it stores information as patterns of connection between neurons. When you remember something, you're not pulling up a file, you're recreating the pattern. This means memory is inherently reconstructive. Every time you remember, you're rebuilding. And this is why active practice works. It rehearses the rebuilding process itself. You're not just storing information, you're practicing retrieval. This also explains why understanding beats memorization. Understanding means you've connected new information to existing knowledge. You've built multiple pathways to access it. If one path fails, you can come at it from another angle. But isolated facts, memorized without context, have only one fragile path. If you forget, you have no way to reconstruct. Think about phone numbers. Years ago, people could remember dozens of phone numbers. How? Because they used them frequently. Each use strengthened the memory, but also, they often chunked them, breaking the 10-digit string into smaller, memorable pieces. And they might create little stories or patterns to help. Now, imagine trying to remember a random string of 50 digits by just staring at it. Nearly impossible. But if those digits encoded a pattern you understood, maybe they represented measurements or a sequence from a mathematical formula, suddenly it becomes manageable. Understanding provides structure, and structure makes memory possible. This is why experts in any field seem to have extraordinary memories in their domain. A chess master can glance at a board and remember the position of every piece. A musician can hear a complex piece once and play it back. A physicist can recall vast amounts of theory without checking references. It's not that they have better memory. They have better organization. They see patterns where novices see chaos. They chunk information into meaningful units. They understand the underlying structure, so they're not remembering individual facts, they're remembering the framework, and the facts follow naturally. You can develop this kind of memory in any field that matters to you. It just requires that you build genuine understanding, not surface-level familiarity. Here's perhaps the most important principle of all. You must be willing to feel stupid. When you close the book and try to explain something, and you realize you can't, there's a moment of discomfort. You feel foolish. You thought you understood, but clearly you don't. This feeling makes people want to skip the testing, to avoid the embarrassment even if no one's watching. But this feeling is the signal that learning is happening. This is where your brain is identifying gaps. This is where real understanding begins. If you always feel comfortable, if everything always seems clear, you're probably not learning. You're probably just recognizing familiar words. The students who succeed are the ones who embrace this discomfort. They seek out the edges of their understanding. They ask themselves hard questions. They don't settle for vague comprehension. There's a beautiful thing that happens once you make this a habit. Learning becomes its own reward, not because it's easy, but because you can feel yourself getting sharper. You can feel your understanding deepening. Knowledge stops being this external thing you're supposed to cram into your head and becomes something you build, something you own. And once you know how to learn effectively, everything becomes accessible. Any book, any field, any skill, you have the tools to master it. Not instantly, not without effort, but genuinely and permanently. So here's what matters. The next time you need to remember something, don't just read it over and over. Don't highlight and hope. Close the book and build it yourself. Explain it in simple words. Find the gaps and fill them. Come back to it later and rebuild. Make it yours. The mind remembers what it constructs far better than what it merely observes. Give your brain something to build, and it will remember. If this approach to learning resonates with you, try it with something you're studying right now. Close this video and test yourself on the key ideas you just heard. Can you explain them? Share your experience in the comments. You've probably noticed something strange about learning. Two people can study the same material for the same amount of time, yet one walks away genuinely understanding it, while the other barely remembers anything at all. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't talent. It's something far more fundamental. And once you understand it, learning becomes almost absurdly efficient. The traditional approach to learning is broken at its core. People sit with textbooks, read page after page, highlight sentences, reread chapters, and convince themselves they're making progress. They spend hours with material, yet when tested, they struggle. When asked to explain what they've learned, they stumble. The knowledge hasn't truly entered their minds. This happens because there's a profound misunderstanding about what learning actually is. People treat their brains like filing cabinets, believing that if they just push information in enough times, it'll stick. They equate exposure with understanding. They mistake recognition for knowledge. When they read something and it feels familiar, they think they've learned it. But familiarity is a deceptive feeling. Here's the real mechanism. The brain doesn't store information like a tape recorder. It builds models. It creates structures of understanding. And these structures are only built through a specific kind of mental activity that most people never engage in. Think about someone learning to play the piano. They could watch someone else play for 100 hours and memorize what it looks like. They could read books about proper technique and chord progressions, but until their own fingers touch the keys, until they struggle to make the sounds themselves, until they fail and correct and fail again, no real learning happens. The same principle applies to everything else. Yet somehow people forget this when it comes to intellectual skills. The fundamental error is passive consumption. Reading is passive. Listening is passive. Watching demonstrations is passive. These activities feel productive because information is flowing past your consciousness, but the brain isn't doing the work that builds understanding. Real learning requires a completely different approach. It demands active reconstruction. Here's the principle. You haven't learned something until you can recreate it from nothing. Not recall it, not recognize it when you see it. Recreate it. Build it again in your mind without the original in front of you. This changes everything about how you study. Instead of reading a chapter 3 times, you read it once, close the book, and try to write out everything it said from memory. Not the words, the ideas, the structure, the relationships. What you can't reconstruct is what you haven't learned. Those are the gaps. Those are where you focus. When you do this, something remarkable happens. Your brain suddenly wakes up. It shifts from passive receiver to active participant. It starts asking questions it never asked before. Why does this connect to that? What happens if this changes? How does this fit with what was said earlier? These questions don't emerge during passive reading. They only surface when you're forced to rebuild the knowledge yourself. The textbook becomes a reference, not a script. You attempt to explain the concept on paper. You get stuck. You realize you don't actually understand something you thought you did. You go back to the source, find the specific piece you're missing, understand it properly this time, close the book again, and continue reconstructing. This is vastly more efficient than traditional study. You might spend 1 hour doing this versus 3 hours reading and rereading, yet the 1 hour produces deeper, more permanent understanding. Why? Because you've done the cognitive work that actually builds knowledge structures. You've practiced the very thing you'll need to do when you use this knowledge later. Generate it from your own understanding. But there's a second principle that multiplies this effectiveness. You must work at the edge of your ability, not in the middle of it. The brain has a peculiar property. It only builds new structures when it encounters difficulty it can barely overcome. If something is too easy, the brain doesn't bother strengthening those pathways, it already has them. If something is too hard, the brain can't make progress and gives up. The sweet spot is right at the boundary where you're struggling but can push through. Most people avoid this zone. They practice what they already know because it feels good. They read material at their current level because it's comfortable. But this is like lifting the same light weight forever and wondering why you're not getting stronger. When you're learning a new mathematical technique, don't do 10 problems that are variations of the same thing. Do 1 or 2 to grasp the pattern, then immediately jump to problems that combine it with other techniques. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get stuck. Figure out why you're stuck. That's where learning happens. When you're reading a difficult technical book, don't reread the same section until it feels comfortable. Read it once carefully, then force yourself to explain it. The discomfort of not being able to explain it properly is the signal you're at the right difficulty level. The effort to push through that discomfort is what builds understanding. The human brain evolved to learn most efficiently through problem solving, not through passive absorption. For thousands of years, learning meant figuring out how to make fire, track animals, predict weather, craft tools. These were all active processes. You couldn't learn them by watching, you had to do them. Fail, adjust, and try again. Academic learning is relatively new in human history, and it often violates these natural learning mechanisms. But the brain hasn't changed. It still learns best through active struggle with problems at the edge of its current capability. Here's the third principle. Understanding must be built from the bottom up, not from the top down. People often try to learn complex things by memorizing high-level summaries or final conclusions. They want the elegant equation without understanding what the symbols mean. They want the sophisticated theorem without grasping the simple cases it builds from. This is backwards. Real understanding is always constructed from fundamentals. You need to know what the pieces are before you can see how they fit together. You need to understand the simple cases before the complex ones make sense. This seems obvious, yet people constantly violate it because they're in a hurry. When you encounter something you don't understand, trace it backwards. What simpler thing does this depend on? Do you truly understand that simpler thing, or did you just memorize it? Can you explain it without looking at notes? If not, you've found your actual starting point. Begin there. This might mean going back to basics you thought you already knew. That's fine. Better to spend an hour truly understanding a fundamental concept than weeks building a shaky structure on top of a misunderstood foundation. There's something else that happens when you build from fundamentals. You develop the ability to figure things out rather than just remember them. If you understand the basic principles deeply, you can derive more complex results when you need them. You're not dependent on memory. You're working from understanding. This leads to the fourth principle. Explanation is the ultimate test. The physicist Enrico Fermi had a habit that revealed his deep understanding. When he learned something new, he would immediately try to explain it to someone else in the simplest possible terms. If he couldn't make it simple, he knew he didn't really understand it yet. This is a perfect diagnostic tool. Can you explain the concept to someone who doesn't already know it? Can you use an analogy that captures the essential idea? Can you answer questions about it without having to consult your notes? The act of explaining forces you to clarify your own thinking. You can't hide behind technical jargon when you're explaining to a novice. You have to understand what's really happening, not just what the textbook says is happening. Try this with everything you learn. After studying a topic, pretend you're teaching it to someone. Speak out loud if you need to. Write it out as if for a letter. When you get stuck or realize your explanation is unclear, that's valuable information. That's exactly where your understanding is weak. This also creates another beneficial effect. It shows you the difference between knowing something and knowing about something. You might know about quantum mechanics, that it exists, that it's strange, that particles behave oddly. But you don't know quantum mechanics unless you can work through the actual mathematics, explain the principles, predict outcomes of experiments. The distinction matters immensely. Now let's talk about the deeper mechanism behind all of this. The brain creates knowledge through a process of building and testing mental models. A mental model is a simplified representation of how something works. When you truly understand something, you have a working model in your mind that you can run like a simulation. For instance, when you understand how a lever works, you have a mental model of forces, pivot points, and distances. You can imagine moving the pivot and predict what happens to the effort needed. You don't need to memorize specific examples. You can generate new examples from your model. These models are built through active engagement. When you passively read about levers, you might form a vague impression, but you don't build the model. When you try to solve problems about levers, when you make predictions and check if they're right, when you get confused and have to reconsider your assumptions, that's when the model gets built and refined. The key insight is that mental models are built through error correction. Your brain makes a prediction based on its current understanding. Reality provides feedback. If there's a mismatch, your brain adjusts the model. This cycle only happens when you're actively using your understanding, not when you're passively receiving information. This is why practice problems are so much more valuable than worked examples. Watching someone else solve a problem doesn't engage your prediction and correction mechanisms. Solving it yourself does. Even when you get it wrong, especially when you get it wrong, you're forcing your brain to adjust its models. The same applies to memory. People think they have bad memories when really they just haven't encoded information properly. Memory isn't about strength of repetition. It's about depth of processing and number of connections. When you actively reconstruct information, when you explain it in your own words, when you connect it to other knowledge, you're creating multiple pathways to that information. Later retrieval becomes easy because there are many routes to reach it. When you simply reread the same text, you create only one shallow pathway that's easily lost. Let's make this concrete with some scenarios. Suppose you're learning calculus, the traditional approach. Read about derivatives, watch your professor work examples, copy down formulas. Practice similar problems until you can do them smoothly. The result: you can do textbook problems but panic when faced with anything slightly different. The better approach: read the basic concept once. Close the book. Try to explain what a derivative means without mathematical notation, just the idea. Can't do it? Open the book, find what you missed, close it again, try to explain it better. Once you can do that, try to figure out how you'd calculate a simple derivative from first principles. Get stuck, check the book for just that piece, close it, try again. Then solve one simple problem. Now, try to predict what would happen in a more complex situation before looking at how it's done. Make the prediction specific. Check if you're right. If not, figure out where your mental model was wrong. Adjust it. Try another prediction. This feels slower initially, but you're building genuine understanding. 2 weeks later, you'll still know how derivatives work. You'll be able to tackle novel problems because you understand the underlying principles, not just the procedures. Or suppose you're learning history. The traditional approach, read chapters, highlight important dates and events, make timeline notes, reread before the test. The result? You can recognize names and dates, but couldn't explain the actual flow of cause and effect. The better approach: read about a historical period. Close the book. Try to write out the narrative in your own words. What happened and why? What were the actual causes, not just the temporal sequence? Get stuck on the connections. Go back to find them. Close the book. Continue. Then ask yourself questions the book didn't ask. Why did this happen in this place and not elsewhere? What had to be true for these events to unfold this way? What would have happened if one factor were different? When you force yourself to think through these counterfactuals, you build a much richer model of the historical dynamics. Or consider learning a technical skill like programming. The traditional approach: follow tutorials step by step, typing what the instructor types, getting working results, feeling like you're learning. The result? You can't write code without a reference. You don't understand why things work. You panic when something breaks. The better approach: read what a programming concept does. Close the tutorial. Try to write code using that concept without looking. It won't work. Figure out why. Look up just that one thing you need. Try again. Get it working. Now try to use it in a different way you haven't seen. Force yourself to adapt, not just copy. The pattern is the same across all domains: active reconstruction, working at the edge of ability, building from fundamentals, testing through explanation, and developing working mental models. There's a final element that ties this together: patience with the process and trust in the struggle. Learning done right feels harder than passive study. You get stuck more often. You feel uncertain more frequently. This discomfort makes people abandon the method and return to the familiar comfort of reading and rereading. They mistake the comfortable feeling of recognition for the substance of learning. But the discomfort is the point. That feeling of struggle, that sense of reaching for something just beyond your grasp, that's the sensation of your brain building new structures. When it feels too easy, you're not learning. When it feels impossible, you've jumped too far ahead. When it feels difficult but achievable, you're exactly where you need to be. The human mind is extraordinarily capable of learning. It's been doing so for hundreds of thousands of years, solving problems far more complex than most academic subjects. It knows how to learn. You just have to work with its natural mechanisms instead of against them. The next time you need to learn something, try this different approach. Don't read it multiple times. Read it once with full attention, then close the source and actively work with the material. Reconstruct it, explain it. Test yourself not with recognition but with generation. Work at the edge of what you can do. Build from the bottom up. Create mental models through prediction and correction. It might feel strange at first. You'll be uncomfortable, but you'll learn more in 1 hour than you previously learned in 3. The knowledge will be deeper, more flexible, more permanent. You'll understand it, not just know about it. And that's the difference between appearing to study and actually learning. One is passive consumption that feels productive but builds nothing lasting. The other is active construction that feels difficult but creates genuine understanding. The choice, as always, is yours.